I've been a fan of today's classic trucks and SUVs for 6 decades. I have owned and professionally repaired, rebuilt, restored, maintained, upgraded, and customized dozens of post-war through 1980s two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive trucks and SUVs that today rank as classics. My 4x4 magazine project vehicles have displayed at trade shows like SEMA. Several multi-purpose Jeep, Land Cruiser, and 4x4 truck builds are featured in my Bentley Publishers truck and Jeep books. Back in high school, I worked evenings, weekends, and summers at a full-service gas station. The Minden Chevron had a busy lube bay, and we serviced post-war to 60s cars and trucks. In those days, today's classic trucks were either working in the community or sparkling at dealership showrooms. It was routine to service post-war 1947 to early 1955 GM advanced design pickups and 1955 to 59 light trucks on the single-post lube rack. I knew the undercarriage of the 1960 to 66 CK models as well. GMC chassis were similar, and we worked with Ford F-Series trucks that dated to the original 1948 models. Ford's twin I-beam pickups came out the same year I got my driver's license. Our rural Nevada ranching community was prime country for 4x4 trucks and SUVs. COD Garage was Carson Valley Chevrolet Jeep Buick dealership. Ned and Rip Ford sold Ford cars, F-trucks, and farm implements, while Manili Motors was the IH Ag Equipment truck and Scout dealership. Popular local 4x4s in the mid-60s were Jeep CJs, the new Jeepster, Gladiator J trucks, and Wagoneers. GM K trucks, tall 4x4 Ford F100 and F250 pickups, sturdy IH 4x4 pickups and stake beds, the Scout, and Ford's new Bronco. Dodge civilian power wagons and the W-Series 4x4 trucks had a loyal following, although the Valley had no Dodge or Chrysler dealership. COD Garage sold a good number of Wagoneers and Super Wagoneers. These all-season four-wheel drives were the upscale original SUVs, built on the stout J-Truck platform and often packed with luxury options that were new to 4x4 vehicles. It was common to see Wagoneers parked at the local country club and golf course. The new Jeepster, CJ Jeep, Scout 800, newly launched first-generation Ford Bronco, and Toyota's FJ Land Cruiser doubled as all-season transportation and backcountry recreational vehicles. When not at work, these rugged classics were used for hunting, fishing, exploring, and rock hounding. The original Bronco was first available only with the 170 cubic inch inline six. Ned and Rip Ford had one of the first 1966 models released in the late summer of 1965. The service manager, Mr. Sorensen, demonstrated the all-new Bronco at our local 4x4 hill climb competition. We watched the front wheels hop helplessly at the base of the sandy slope. The new cloth-top Bronco struggled to get off the line. Feedback from dealerships encouraged Ford engineers to quickly remedy this coil front spring damping problem, just in time for the 289 V8 launch in the spring of 1966. The first-generation V8 Bronco's performance is legendary. 1966 to 77 Broncos are prized classics today. There were a few Studebaker pickups in the area. I like Studebaker cars and trucks, especially the raised pickups with a NAPCO 4x4 conversion. Before the GM CK truck era began in 1960, Chevrolet and GMC truck dealers did NAPCO Power Pack 4x4 conversions on 1950s models. In 1956, GMC began installing NAPCO kits on the assembly line, followed by Chevrolet in 1957 with its RPO 690 option. This arrangement lasted through 1959. From 1960 forward, GM light trucks featured an in-house factory 4x4 chassis and powertrain. From the mid-1930s through World War II, Ford turned to Marmon Harrington for its 4x4 conversions. That relationship continued through the 1950s in F-Series trucks until Ford launched its own 1959 F100 and F250 factory 4x4s. There were also Ford NAPCO conversions. The final Studebaker Champ pickups featured a distinctive Lark-style grille. At my first job, the Gardnerville Hancock station in the summer of 1963, a new Lark Daytona coupe pulled to the pumps looking like a compact economy car. The driver asked me to check the oil. A 14-year-old kid, I popped the hood and stared at an Avani R2 289 V8 engine. The shining foil in the engine bay helped keep the charge air cooler for the Paxton supercharger that forced air through the throat of a Carter AFB carburetor. The car had a factory floor shifter for a manual T10 4-speed transmission. Back then, we called a lightweight muscle car like this a sleeper. The Ford Falcon Sprint V8, V8 Chevy 2, and Nova SS fell into this category. The supercharged Studebaker 289 V8 made 290 horsepower, slightly more than 1 horsepower per cubic inch. There were also 60s cars like the Ford Ranchero and Chevy El Camino. Thanks to their pickup bed utility and high-performance options, these cars sold well at Carson Valley, nearby Carson City and Reno. High-performance options turned a Ranchero or El Camino into a genuine muscle car. Many of these car-based pickups stayed in the area, and you can see them today at Hot August nights and community car shows. Emphasis on high-performance vehicles was encouraged by Nevada's legendary basic speed law. Cars and trucks could legally bury their speedometer needles on deserted rural highways as long as the road conditions were considered safe. The American automotive culture at the time was all about speed and performance, a trend that grew steadily from the mid-50s and lasted into the early 1970s. When it comes to service information for working on classic cars and trucks, factory service guides and trade manuals date back to the 1920s. Like today, they outline how to perform automotive and truck repairs. In my reference library, I have service, parts, and labor rate manuals ranging from the 1920s and 30s to the 2000s. My original interest in service books dates to the mid-60s. At the Minden Chevron station, I pored over Standard Oil's Atlas lubrication guides to find the dozens of grease fittings on post-war and 50s trucks. We used Motors and Chilton manuals for ignition, carburetor, wheel bearing, and brake work. I learned to read the Atlas engine analyzer scope patterns. Ignition breaker points required routine replacement, along with spark plugs, a distributor cap, condenser, and rotor. Major tune-ups included carburetor overhauls, testing and adjusting the distributor spark advance, and replacing spark plug cables. These are some of the tools we used when servicing breaker point ignitions and carburetors. Compare this uncomplicated assortment of tools to a contemporary scan tool and other expensive diagnostic equipment. The carburetor adjustment tools were my professional approach for Carter carburetors, including the muscle car AFBs. These carburetor tools also work for Rochester, Stromberg, Zenith, and Holley carburetors. Tools like this turn up at eBay and auctions. At the podcast, I'll talk about electronic ignition and fuel injection retrofits versus sticking with an original equipment breaker point distributor and factory carburetor.
You need tools to adjust the float in the carburetor. You need a set of small wrenches for the distributor work and adjusting the points. An inexpensive test probe is always handy. You'll need a feeler gauge set to set the points. It's easier to use a distributor clamp bolt wrench to reach the awkward locations at the base. Wires and ground straps fray. These parts need to be replaced. A dwell meter is a must tool for adjusting points properly. I've had this meter for over 50 years and bought it at a Western auto store for my personal use. This easy start remote switch has been with me for just about as long as the dwell meter. The switch is especially useful for setting dwell with a distributor cap removed. On the older classic engines, you need a set of feeler gauges for adjusting valves on mechanical or solid lifter engines. This is a periodic part of tune-up work. On Chevrolet 235 inline sixes, be careful. Some of the engines have hydraulic lifters. Truck engines should be solid lifters. Classic trucks before EFI have mechanical fuel pumps, and you need to check the pressure on the pump to be certain that it's compatible with the carburetor. A quality compression gauge will put you in the ballpark, but a cylinder leak down test is my favorite. I've had my cylinder leak down tester since 1981. A conventional timing light is handy and especially useful for setting base timing. A step beyond a conventional timing light is my Snap-on Advanced Degrees timing light for checking the advance mechanism. I've also used this for setting advance curves on high-performance engines. For solid, non-wire electrodes, this spark plug gapper has worked for 50 years. It gets a parallel gap that exceeds any other method for gapping a spark plug. This tool cannot be used on spark plugs with a wire electrode. I have many miscellaneous tools. Be certain to use a quality distributor cam lobe and point rubbing block grease.
Post-war 50s and muscle-era light trucks were well suited for northern Nevada's four-season climate. In 1965, I took my first driver's license exam in my folks' one-year-old Jeep CJ5. While in high school, in addition to my must-have 1955 Chevy two-door coupe, I owned two early Ford pickups, first a 1938 half-ton with a flathead V8 and later a 1951 Ford F3 truck with the L-head 226 inline 6. The F3 had the last non-synchromesh 4-speed gearbox and taught me how to double-clutch shift. I eventually mastered changing gears without using the clutch at all, while carefully avoiding gear clash. Note that shifting into reverse requires a complete stop and use of the clutch. So does shifting into first gear at a stop. The clutch must be used when coming to a complete stop or when cranking the engine to start it in gear. Double clutching is for changing gears when the truck is moving forward. Engine speed is adjusted or synchronized to match gear and road speed. My brother-in-law's 1951 advanced design Chevrolet half-ton work truck was always in the picture, along with a family friend's 1949 GMC 100 half-ton pickup. I have tales to share about the well-worn GMC pickup. A few years after I graduated high school, my folks replaced the 4-cylinder CJ5 with a new 1970 Chevy K10 short wheelbase fleet-side 4x4. In the mid-70s, they sold me their K10. In 1979, I bought a 73 K10 short wheelbase square body, factory equipped with a 350 V8 SM465 Muncie 4-speed gearbox and the rugged new Process 205 gear drive transfer case. The two K10s would be classic trucks today, and I should have kept both of them. Had I kept the 70 model, I would have converted the front brakes from drum type to disc. Drum brakes on 1960 to 1970 K models left a lot to be desired. Other 4x4s I've owned included a 1950 Jeep flat fender CJ3A and a Scout 800. In the late 60s, I rehabbed the CJ3A flat fender Willys for reliable recreational four-wheeling at the Anza Borrego Desert. The L-head 134-4 was adequate for low-range crawling. Decades later, I built up a first-year 1955 CJ5 with the F-head 134 4-cylinder engine for my Bentley Publishers book, The Jeep CJ Rebuilder's Manual, covering 1946 to 71 CJ models. The book includes my rebuild of a 231 Buick Evenfire V6 to repower the early CJ5. This is the blueprint-built 134 F-head engine in the 1955 CJ5. My engine rebuild can be found in the Jeep CJ Rebuilder's Manual, 1946 to 71. We owned a 1987 Grand Wagoneer, 3 Toyota FJ40 Land Cruisers, a Ford Bronco, a 1987 Ford F-150 short wheelbase 4x4 with a 300 inline 6 and new Process 435 4-speed, a 1986 GMC Suburban, and a 1987 Chevrolet Suburban. Both Suburbans were prime 3/4-ton 4x4 K models with 3-row seating and desirable cargo rear doors. The 1987 engine had the first-year throttle body injection. 2 of the FJ40 Land Cruisers were off-road magazine project vehicles, and one build went on display at the magazine's SEMA Show booth. I built a 1983 Jeep CJ5 that displayed at the Score Show in Anaheim during the early 90s and was featured in both Off-Road Magazine and the original edition of my Jeep Owner's Bible, a Bentley Publishers book. Today, the Jeep Owner's Bible is in its 3rd edition and covers World War II through TJ Wrangler era models. The book earned a Mopar Performance part number and became a bestseller. The FJ40s were both featured in my Toyota Truck and Land Cruiser Owner's Bible, also a Bentley Publishers book. Another project for Off-Road Magazine was a 1970 short wheelbase Dodge R-Body W100 4x4 truck with a Udeline flare-side bed. I replaced the 318LA V8 with a Mopar high-performance 360 crate motor. I kept the original NP435 4-speed truck transmission and NP205 transfer case and retrofitted an IH Travelall semi-floating Dana 60 rear axle with a 5-on 5.5-inch wheel pattern to match the Dodge truck. For 4WD and Sport Utility magazine, I built up our 4-liter 1999 XJ Cherokee 4-wheel drive Sport from stone stock to a legitimate multi-purpose trail and street vehicle. Each project required research and in-depth testing of modifications, plus selecting the right aftermarket parts to improve performance, handling, and safety. The XJ Cherokee has gone nearly 100,000 miles since those first upgrades and modifications 2 decades ago. From 1983 to 1997, I tested the popular new 4x4s of that era for Off-Road Magazine. Tests included Jeep, Ford, GM, Dodge, Toyota, Nissan, Isuzu, and Suzuki models. There was a long-term test of the last square-body K5, a 1991 model. I special ordered the Blazer with an SM465 4-speed manual transmission that had a non-synchromesh compound first gear. The SM465 truck box was nearly obsolete by 1991. and the iron transmission case came with a rust patina. Another long-term test was a 1994 Chevrolet K2500 Suburban with a 6.5-liter turbo diesel V8. My test reports appeared in Off-Road magazine and the Portland Oregonian newspaper, where my drive time column published each week. The 6.5-liter diesel was popular in the Humvee. This was a Detroit diesel that predates the Isuzu Duramax. I had the option to buy either of these GM trucks at the end of their tests and should have bought the K5 Blazer. I began my first job as a professional mechanic in late 1968. I was hired to service a fleet of 22 military surplus trucks and vans built from 1949 to 1960. The shop was at the engineering department of a large community hospital. There were 1955 to 1959 Chevrolet 3100 pickups, a 1960 C10 Chevrolet short wheelbase stepside, and several 1958 to 60 Ford F100s. These were all traditional bare-bones stripped utility trucks with short wheelbase stepside or flare-side beds, inline six-cylinder engines, and column shift 3-speed transmissions with synchromesh on second and third gear only. The first day on the job, it rained heavily. Aside from the light-duty pickup trucks assigned to the hospital's maintenance staff, there were 3 IH Metro vans used for laundry and food delivery. 2 were stalled at the hospital's loading dock with dead batteries. The medium-duty 1949 GMC flatbed with a 270 inline Jimmy 6 hadn't run in months, and a recently purchased 1960 Ford F500 stake bed truck had come from the surplus auction with a missing instrument panel. Severed wires were hanging out of the dash. The truck hadn't been started or driven. The big 1950 IHL 190 dump truck intrigued me. It had a massive all-iron RD406 overhead valve straight 6 under the hood, a Clark 5-speed non-synchromesh transmission, and a 2-speed rear axle. In time, I would know each truck and van thoroughly. I was solely responsible for that fleet. Beyond routine service and tune-ups, I did every kind of mechanical work on these trucks. The pickups and vans were traditional Chevy 235, Ford 223, and IHBD 240 inline overhead valve 6-cylinder engines. The F500 medium-duty stake bed truck had the long-stroke 262 cubic inch inline 6 that shared features with the Ford 223. Similarly, Chevrolet stroked the 235 to 261 cubic inches, which made it a popular medium-duty truck engine during the 1954 to 62 period. While the pickups had manual 3-speed column shift transmissions, the Metro vans ran BorgWarner 3-speed automatics. When I took the ICS Automatic Transmission Specialist course during my first year on the job, a tired and leaking Metro van transmission became my first rebuild project. I rebuilt the manual transmissions in nearly all of the Ford and Chevrolet pickups. Drivers abused the non-synchromesh first and reverse gears. With trucks driven by anyone who had access to the key cabinet, clutch replacements and brake work were ongoing chores. I got my fair share of asbestos exposure doing that service work. The late 60s and early 1970s predated the safety precautions and standards that unfolded from the mid-70s onward. Fortunately, my lungs are healthy and fully functional to this day. I quit smoking when I was 20 years old, which certainly helped. I'll share the equipment and safety methods that can make brake and clutch work safer on older vehicles. All classic trucks came with asbestos content brake and clutch friction materials. Manifold, exhaust flange, and head gaskets also contain asbestos. Today, the 1958 to 60 Ford and 1955 to 60 Chevrolet pickups, even the Metro vans, would be sought after. The fleet's light-duty trucks were primed for either stone stock restoration or a modern Restamod street truck project. The medium-duty trucks would make classic haulers. When the 22-vehicle fleet was my full-time day job, my personal driver was a 1955 Ford F100 short bed pickup that I restored and built up over a 7-year period. At one point, I replaced the original Y-block Ford V8 with a 1957 Pontiac V8, first mated to the original Ford manual transmission, then replaced with a dual coupling Hydromatic. Eventually, my engine of choice was a small block Chevy V8 that I blueprint built from scratch. I restored the transmission, chassis, and body to F100 factory standards and replaced the Hurst floor shifter with stock column shift linkage. Despite the use of the Pontiac and small block Chevy V8s, the frame and body were preserved to enable an unscarred return to stone stock. I'll devote podcasts to that truck and the classic 1953 to 56 F100s. Following the Ford F100, I owned a string of two-wheel drive pickups. The first one was the 1960 GMC 1000 series half-ton with a short wheelbase and fender side bed. The GMC truck was equivalent to a Chevy C10 stepside. Be aware that from the 1920s to late 60s, GMC trucks had unique components that distinguished them from a Chevrolet. I rate the GMC engine offerings, in particular, as substantially more robust than Chevrolet engines from at least 1937 through the 50s. In the 60s, the GMC V6 engines were commercial grade, actually medium-duty truck designs that were clearly more rugged than the Chevrolet inline sixes or small block V8s. Despite this, GMC gradually added Chevrolet's inline 230, 250, and 292 sixes and Chevrolet V8s to its base engine offerings and options list. For light trucks, the GMC 305 and 351E V6 offerings were completely eliminated in the spring of 1969. In 1976, we bought a 1968 3/4-ton GMC 4x4 pickup with a factory Chevrolet 327 small block V8. This was the only year the 327 had a big journal crankshaft. The 68 GMC 4x4 pickup had dealer-installed linkage power steering assist. The private party seller shared that he had skidded the truck into a hard snowbank at North Lake Tahoe. He tried to pass off the steering pull as the truck simply needed front wheel alignment. In fact, the left steering knuckle upper bearing was damaged, which created a negative camber angle at the left front wheel. I restored the front axle's closed steering knuckle bearings and repaired the power steering assist control valve. The truck steered like new. 1968 was the first year for the SM 465 4-speed, making this a stout truck for gathering firewood. In the 3/4-ton 4x4 category, that 68 GMC truck was another one I should have kept. Today's GMC truck marketing plays on the historical distinctions. The brand is advertised as a professional-grade truck, implying that it is better quality than a Chevrolet or other light-duty trucks. Often, these trucks run down the same assembly line today. Distinctive and prominent on the 1960 GMC pickup was introduction of the iron 60-degree V6 engine and use of an outsourced Dana Spicer 44 style or 45 rear axle instead of Chevrolet's corporate or Eaton HO32 axle. My GMC's Dana Spicer rear axle had a power lock traction differential. The differential had a flaw common to these axles. In a podcast, I'll share details on this power lock problem and how to remedy it. I'll also devote podcast time to the GMC's novel 60-degree 305 V6 with its spark plugs fitted on the intake side of the cylinder heads. The next time I encountered this design was when we bought a 2002 Jeep Liberty with a 3.7-liter V6. Both GMC and Chevrolet used torsion bar front suspension in 1960 to 62 trucks, breakthrough engineering for that period.
While the two-wheel drive light trucks had innovative torsion bar front suspension, the K-model 4x4s ran on traditional leaf springs for their beam front and rear axles. This required different frames for two-wheel drive versus 4x4 models. Converting a two-wheel drive truck to four-wheel drive is not a simple process when the frames differ. Be careful about this. Don't buy a two-wheel drive truck expecting to easily change it to four-wheel drive.
My other classic-era two-wheel drive trucks included a 1958 Chevy 3600 3/4-ton that was my hauler when I operated a motorcycle service shop as a side gig. This was a utility workhorse with a 235 inline-6 and SM 420 4-speed transmission. Gearing was 457-1, with a super stout 32-tooth ring gear and 7-tooth pinion arrangement. Although great for hauling, the truck was a snail on the highway. Nonetheless, I made 2 long trips from northern Nevada to Denver, Colorado, and San Diego. Utility was the intended use for many trucks that we consider today's classics. I needed a reliable truck with a lengthy bed, and the familiar maintenance chores were easy. I did an in-chassis ring and valve job on the 235 engine. The truck did its job. Similarly, when I worked as a heavy equipment operator on the Interstate 80 bypass project at Winnemucca, Nevada, I bought an aging 1962 Chevy C10 short wheelbase stepside with a last 235 inline-6 and an SM 420 4-speed. The C10 provided reliable transportation for driving back and forth between Carson City and Winnemucca. Whenever I needed reliable transportation or a dependable work truck, Chevrolet always came through. Today, that short bed C10 would be a prime candidate for a Restomod build. Another memorable two-wheel drive truck was the 1964 Ford F100 long bed half-ton with a 4-speed transmission. We were living at married student housing while I attended the University of Oregon. On a shoestring budget, my son John and I changed the truck's clutch in the parking lot. 1964 was the last year Ford used the Y-Block 292 V8 and a one-piece beam front axle in the light trucks. I was a Ford Y-Block V8 fan early on, and will go into the history, design, and applications of the Y-Block. Expect podcasts on the Ford FE V8s, Small Block 302, 351 Windsor, 351 M400, and the 385 series Big Block 460 engines that we find in classic Ford F-trucks. The 64 F100 was reliable and kept us rolling until we could afford the 1973 Chevrolet K10 short wheelbase 4x4, bought used in excellent condition. The stylish K10 with a 350 small block V8, SM465 4-speed, and gear drive NP205 transfer case ranks as my all-time favorite GM pickup. Today, that classic square body 4x4 would be worth a bundle. Work as a light and medium-duty truck fleet mechanic and later a GMC truck dealership powertrain and chassis tech provided a solid foundation for my career as an automotive journalist. In 1983, I started publishing an off-road magazine. In addition to writing and illustrating monthly technical articles and how-to features for Argus's off-road magazine, Popular Hot Rodding, and several other publications, I wrote the monthly technical Q&A column for Off-Road for 1985 to 1997 and the Popular Hot Rodding Q&A for 1987 to 1997. At Off-Road, the reader questions and topics were about post-war to 90s 4x4 trucks, Jeep 4x4s, 4x4 light utility vehicles, and the original SUVs. I participated in the 1987 Jeep Cup Rally, wheeling a first-year edition of the 4-liter XJ four-wheel drive Cherokee. We ruptured the upper radiator hose, finished the competition without harming the engine, then fed the details to AMC Jeep. Engineers added the familiar netted sleeve protection to the hose. For Popular Hot Rodding, the car topics were mostly today's classics, ranging from the Tri-5 Chevys through the 60s muscle cars. We eventually took a deep dive into the EFI horsepower race revival in the 80s and 90s. I also wrote regularly for Dobbs Corvette Fever and Chevy Truck magazines, testing the LT5-powered 1990 ZR1 Corvette at both Riverside and Watkins Glen. In the 2000s, my freelance articles appeared in 4WD and Sport Utility Magazine, Classic Truck Magazine, and Corvette Magazine. More recently, I wrote quarterly features from 2016 to 2024 for the Turbo Diesel Register, a niche magazine focused on Cummins-powered Dodge Ram trucks. To support my writing career, I have built a resource library that now fills 4 bookcases. Throughout the 90s and into the 2000s, I wrote and illustrated 7 Bentley Publishers books covering Jeep, GM, and Ford trucks, Toyota trucks and Land Cruisers, plus Harley-Davidson Evolution V-twin motorcycles. My best-selling Owner's Bible truck series earned official corporate endorsements and part numbers from Chrysler Jeep, Ford, and General Motors. Each of my books is a deep dive into the models that today we consider classic trucks and the original SUVs. This podcast is all about these classic trucks. I'll share their history and the close-up design features that changed or improved these trucks and SUVs over time. For buyers new to this market, I'll share my best picks for restoration, a Restomod project, or a 4x4 collectible investment. We'll dive into mechanical restoration work, practical powertrain and axle upgrades, and how to preserve these increasingly valuable trucks and SUVs. There are workarounds and a range of modifications to upgrade models that lack modern safety and performance features. I'll share how to remedy these shortcomings without diminishing the truck's originality. In the process, you'll discover ways to participate in the exciting classic truck scene and culture.
In the mid-1990s, I built this shop at Yerington, Nevada. The 2,400 square feet provided space for working on Bentley books. From 2005 to 2009, we used this shop for doing vehicle mechanical restoration on classic trucks and cars. In the summer of 2006, we hosted the Nevada Rides Tour stop at our shop.
There are clear ways to determine a truck's investment potential. This insight will help determine whether you build a pristine stone stock collectible truck or shift your approach and create an all-out custom resto mod. For those wanting a daily driver pickup or SUV, I'll share improvements that make a classic truck safer, better handling, and more reliable for tackling today's high-speed highways and interstates. Many enthusiasts are turning to classic and older trucks as an alternative to remarkably expensive, high-tech new trucks. Our newest vehicle, is the 2005 Ram Cummins 3500 four-wheel drive quad-cab single rear wheel pickup that we bought new in October of 2004. It has a short 6.3-foot bed, which holds the wheelbase to a maneuverable 140.5 inches. The truck now has 192,000 miles on it. Preserving this truck and keeping it ready for any demand requires the same preventive maintenance formula that I developed for the hospital's 22-vehicle fleet over 50 years ago. Once I refined that method, we had a zero breakdown record for surplus vehicles, some of them 2 decades old. With the right preventive maintenance, ongoing inspections, and strategic tests, you can catch trouble before parts fail in service and leave your vehicle stranded alongside the road or a remote trail. Through this podcast, I'll share how this strategy works and which cost-effective diagnostic tools work best. Beyond dealership warranty work and recalls, I have performed all service work on every vehicle my family has ever owned. At the channel, you will find how-to details on professional-level engine, transmission, chassis, axle, steering, and brake system restoration and rebuilding. The podcast will focus on how you can restore and maintain a classic truck's drivability, reliability, and safety. Parts quality plays a role here, and I'll cover that topic. For viewers and listeners attracted to later trucks or SUVs with higher mileage, like our 1999 XJ Cherokee or the '05 Ram Cummins 3500 pickup, I'll share how these vehicles can be a cost-effective alternative to buying a new truck. I'll walk you through how to inspect and buy a used 4x4 or classic truck and what it takes to make these trucks roadworthy and keep them up. Of special interest to me is how to preserve originality during a stone stock classic truck restoration. Whether a 2-wheel drive or 4x4, authenticity is key when restoring collectible vehicles. My professional background includes machine shop work, welding, precision mechanical restoration work, and tuning on classic trucks and post-war through muscle-era cars. I have restored vintage and classic engines, axles, steering systems, manual and overdrive gearboxes, and automatic transmissions like the Hydromatic, Powerglide, Fordomatic, Ford C4 and C6, the Iron Torqueflite, 2- and 3-band Borg-Warner units, Packard Ultramatics, and the Iron Dynaflow.
The sturdy clearspan building provided plenty of space for all of my equipment and a lift. Among the many vehicles I worked with was a 1968 Shelby GT KR500. The tired 428 Cobra Jet FE Ford V8 needed attention. An advantage of the cylinder leak down tester is it can be done on an engine that's on the floor. These are genuine CJ heads, but there's a surprise in store. All of the peripheral parts in this engine are genuine Cobra Jet 428. The clean piston crown indicates that coolant was entering that cylinder. This car is on the Shelby registry, yet the engine block is actually a 390 block. The block was so overboard for 428 pistons that one cylinder had to be sleeved. I did a thorough blueprint rebuild of this engine. It will run like new and now has a genuine 428 block that I sourced. These kinds of problems always come up with classic trucks. The FE engine is used in Ford F-trucks. This is a steering gear out of the GT 500KR Mustang. These gears get cooked by the driver's side exhaust manifold. Ford replaced the Gemmer Wehrmann roller steering gears in F-trucks with units similar to this. My blueprint rebuild included NOS Ford parts. This is a level of workmanship required for restoring valuable classic cars and trucks. This 1960 Corvette steering gear is similar to steering gears used in Chevrolet and GMC trucks. This is a Wehrmann roller sector steering gear. Gears similar to this were used on trucks. Quality parts are essential for a blueprint rebuild of a steering gear. For a classic truck rebuild, this level of workmanship is essential. Due to popularity and demand, this roller is available in the aftermarket. A blueprint rebuild finishes with black epoxy-based paint. The Corvette ball-type wheel bearings are also common to the pickup trucks. In the podcast, I'll share a precision adjustment measure that makes ball bearings just as reliable as tapered rollers. Mechanically, the C1 Corvette is essentially 1953 passenger car engineering. Here, I am doing a blueprint restoration of the distributor from the Corvette. The Delco Remy window cap distributor first appeared in 1956 and became common from 1957 up on V8 engines. My Sun 720 oscilloscope engine analyzer is right in step for classic truck and car restoration. Obsolete castings like this 1953 Buick power steering unit requires special care. This unit required cast iron repair that I performed with TIG. At the channel, I have several videos on cast iron repair using TIG method of welding. I was able to blueprint restore this vintage steering gear. Once machined and painted, the repair is imperceptible. GMC Truck borrowed more than just the V8 Pontiac engines for the blue chip truck line. The Saginaw inline integral power steering gear was available for 1955 to 59 GMC light trucks. This Pioneer gear is the predecessor to the rotary valve Series 800 steering gears. I share a blueprint rebuild of the Series 800 at the channel. You can see the difference between these units. The power piston on this unit uses metal rings, so I'm able to hone the cylinder. This plug retains the recirculating ball nut. It is critical. In a later GMC truck manual, it's recommended that this plug be welded to the piston. I used TIG welding for that process. 2 decades ago, I was able to source the retaining screw. This is an NOS Saginaw part. This is the ball nut. The retainer screw goes into the ball nut and secures the ball nut to the power piston rack. This is a critical safety feature. If this retainer comes loose, the ball nut and piston separate. The new retainer screw is in place. As per the instructions in a late 50s GMC truck manual, I will weld the retainer to the piston rack. Weld crowns must not interfere with a housing bore. I use precision pressing tools and finishing tools for installing new bushings. This gear is now blueprint rebuilt. If subscribers find these processes interesting, I will do more of this at the podcast. This is an elaborate and somewhat primitive gear that precedes the Series 800 rotary valve power steering. For a resto mod, a Series 800 Saginaw integral rotary valve power steering unit would be a good upgrade. This authentic restoration of a 1955 to 59 GMC truck gear would be appropriate for a collectible truck. Authentic restoration of a classic truck would involve this kind of work. New old stock parts, NOS, are becoming increasingly scarce. They get used up and there are no more. 2 decades ago, I was fortunate enough to find the parts needed. Ford fans will recognize this Gemmer Werman roller steering gear. They were wear-prone, and this one is from a 1956 Ford pickup. I have rebuilt many of these Gemmer gears, and fortunately the parts were available 2 decades ago. Care must be taken when installing the roller and pin. I use TIG process to secure the pin. I isolate the heat while welding to prevent damage to the roller bearings and other parts. I fabricated special tools to enable pressing the tube into the new worm. In the process, there was no risk of bending or distorting the hollow tube. This restored gear will perform and last at least as long as the factory build. For authentic classic truck restoration, this is the work required. This cheap Ross cam and lever steering gear is very familiar. I've rebuilt many of them. You will find restoration videos at the channel. I rebuilt this Studebaker Borg-Warner 3-speed automatic transmission 2 decades ago. This unit is identical to the units that were in the 1959 and 60 Metro vans in the 22 vehicle surplus fleet. I rebuilt those Metro units in the late 1960s. Classic truck 4x4s require front axle builds. This one is an open knuckle Jeep Wrangler Dana 30 axle. Here I'm doing a factory level rebuild of the Dana 30 front axle. In the process, I'll install an ARB air locker.
For classic truck work, the podcast will share insights into demanding factory-level mechanical restoration. There are workarounds and a range of modifications to upgrade models that lack modern safety and performance features. I'll share how to remedy these shortcomings without diminishing the truck's originality. In the process, you'll discover ways to participate in the exciting classic truck scene and culture. Restoration, upgrades, and quality unit repair work require reliable service data that meets original equipment factory standards. My automotive library covers service details on 1920s through modern era cars, trucks, and SUVs. Truck and SUV service manuals and in-depth data range from the pre- and post-war period through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and well into the 2000s. My library will be a constant resource for the podcast. The podcast's aim is to share what I have learned and experienced. This includes hands-on work exposure to classic Jeep vehicles, GM trucks and Suburbans, Ford F-trucks and Broncos, IH trucks, Scouts, Dodge and Ram trucks, Toyota pickups and Land Cruisers, Land Rovers, and even the rare Nissan Patrol. I've spent 6 decades tuning, rebuilding, restoring, and maintaining what we consider classic trucks today. I'll follow your comments and project questions. I want to know your experiences and value your subscription. Your input will help steer the podcast's topics and content. Today's classic truck ownership experience can be exciting and rewarding. Please subscribe and join us.